So, today we're talking about alternating rhombus twists in a tiling that I call aligned rhombi. So, why do I call it aligned rhombi? Well, that's because we are only going to use two pleat directions. We're not going to use the third at all. So, these rhombi, even though they show up differently on the paper, look the same in their respective tilings blocks. Or I should say with these, it's like this-ish way, this-ish way, and that's having the pleats running perpendicular to the edges of the block. So, hi, I'm Madonna. Welcome back to Gathering Folds, and diving into these rhombi, we've got these structures of quadrilaterals that are aligned in the same direction and are forming loops of 4. This should sound very familiar if you've watched my video on alternating in the square tiling. So we have the same exact options with the rhombi as we did with the squares. The difference is we're on a triangle grid and we've got that third direction of grid that's not being used. So we've got the closed, closed, same side, closed, closed, opposite sides, and likewise we can do open, closed, open, same side, which I taught in the Rhombus Twists video, closed, open, opposite sides, which we'll be doing today, and then open, open, same side, open, open, opposite sides, and then we can also take any of these options and add extra space between the twists. So one thing that I'm going to be talking about more this week, especially on my Instagram and Facebook feeds, is a pattern that's intermediate between these two. So here I've got 2 spacings in each direction between each twist. And here I have 3 in each spacing, 3 spacings in each direction between twists. But what if we had alternating 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2. And that's the structure that I'm going to be talking about more this week with the pattern Caravan. So with that preliminary examples out of the way, let's dive into folding. I'll be using a 32-fold triangle grid on a square today. You can use whichever grid you find to be more reasonable for you. That might be a 24-fold triangle grid on a hexagon. It might be a 16-fold grid would be a little on the small side to get the concepts that I'm talking about, but whatever grid you want to use will be fine. We'll use the same start, we'll use the same repetitions, and the important thing is being able to recognize how to continue from the center. So first off, we need to find the center of our paper. And so I'm going to fold my paper in half along the edge parallel direction, and then bend my paper in half. I'm not creating a new fold here. I'm just locating that center point. And with that point located, I'm going to go ahead and mark it. So one thing that I want to do with this piece is try and put the 2 directions of pleats that we're going to use on these 2 directions. So if I'm going to have my central twist be right-handed, and I'm going to start on this side with a closed rhombus twist, then I'm going to start my twist with these mountain folds. So that'll get me a right-handed So again, right-handed is thumb up in the center, fingers along the direction of mountains. When you curl your right hand fingers, they should hit the parallel valley. And that's true for front side or back side. Either way works. So with this setup around my center point here, and this is why this is recorded, you'll have time to go back and catch all of the details when you can pause me and back up and play. I'll set up my rhombus twist. And the reason I knew that the rhombus had to be that way is because I was able to visualize in my brain and say, okay, if this line is the through line, which way do the diagonals have to be for it to rotate this way? And so there's a little bit of visualization work there to get started if you want to make sure that your pattern's aligned a particular way. So once your rhombus is set up, you can go ahead and squash. And the way we're going to distinguish which side is which is one side is going to have all closed rhombi and the other side is going to have all open rhombi. So since we're in an alternating structure, all of the pleats coming from the closed twist are going to go to open twists. And we said they're all going to be on the other side. So we'll flip over, and I flipped over a vertical axis. And then we're going to set up our next twist. So one of the things that I'm going to do to choose the spacing in this pattern is to use tube pleats. So I'm going to sit here and say, okay, I want my next valley fold to be one spacing out from the folded mountain, and my mountain one spacing out from that. This is the definition of a tube pleat, because when we bring that in together, we end up with this tube-like structure where these two mountain folds are touching. And then I need to look for how to set up my next twist. If it was going to be a closed twist, then I would be looking for, okay, this looks like a central diamond, and we'll go from there. But since it's an open twist, one way to see it is to look for this anvil structure. And another way is to say, oh, this would be the closed version, and so the pleat that would be going straight out here, I'm going to shift over one. The pleat that would be coming in here, I'm going to shift down one. And so let me run these pleats all the way through. And there we've outlined the anvil structure, both by thinking about the anvil and by thinking about the closed version and then shifting the two non-reference pleats over one spacing each. So once we've got this twist set up, we can go ahead and squash. And then we'll move on to the next twist. Now for this first loop around the center, I'm going to do all of the twists on the back side and then flip over and do the twists on the front. This is not necessarily how we're going to do it carrying further out, but this is to help you keep track of which side is which, so I'm not flipping over between each twist. So coming around, I'm going to go to the bottom of the tube of the twist that I just made, set up its own tube, and here I'm still looking for that anvil structure. I'm just going to see it in a different place because these two pleats are coming together at a 120-degree angle. And so my anvil is actually going to be over here. And so now I have a pleat from the anvil crossing under the pleat from my existing open twist, and they're meeting at a 120-degree angle, which means that I can open the overlying pleat and put in a triangle wrap to secure that pleat in place before I squash my rhombus. So if you're ever in doubt about what orientation your rhombus should be, since we're using an alternating structure, each of these rhombi is going to end up in exactly the same orientation. So then we want to continue circling around, and I'm going to go to the bottom of the tube. I'm going to rotate my paper around halfway, so it's going to look the same as it did when we put in this twist. We're going to start by defining our tube, which sets up our spacing. And when I set that up, I have several cues that I can use here to see what's going to happen next. So if I can't spot the anvil immediately, then I can use the fact that the anvil has the same orientation in all of these twists on this side and say, okay, when it's twisted around, the anvil has to be in this orientation because that's the way the anvil is in each of these other two twists. Or I can say, oh, and this is the part that I haven't explained yet, each of these rhombi is in a position of twofold rotational symmetry, which means what happens on one side is the same as what happens on the other. But that doesn't generalize to the other two directions. So these two directions are going to be the same, these two directions are going to be the same, but they're not going to be the same as each other. And I can say, okay, this closed rhombus slit on the other side has the anvil, has a point of the anvil coming directly to the corner. So the point of the anvil has to be right here. And from there, I can get the rest. Opening things up, getting in the rest of my pleats. Again, since these are rhombi, we want to be very certain that our pleats are taking the shape of an X, or more specifically, X this way, not a crow's foot. So we want to avoid having 3 in one direction and 1 in the other. So for example, if I were to try and put this pleat over here, that would be 1, 2, 3 in this direction and 1 that way. We need to have 2 sets of parallel pleats. Then this pleat overlap is coming in at a 60-degree angle. So if this pleat had continued this way, it would be a 60-degree angle between the two, which means that we either just do a pleat overlap or we do a compound wrap. Either way works perfectly well. The compound wrap, you can see, gives me an extra space before anything happens. And so that's particularly good for really dense spacings. So squashing this rhombus, I'm going to continue around and get that fourth and final pleat around my central rhombus. And I need to form a tube, but it doesn't look like I have anything to reference against. That's because my valley is in here, and the other way to reference a tube is the valleys are 2 spacings apart. So I've got my valley out here, my mountain over here, and what I'm going to do is open this bottom pleat first so I can pop down my valley, let the mountain go through, put in a compound wrap. So notice I've got these 2 3-way intersections of mountains and a 3-way intersection of valleys down below. And that will secure these pleats enough for me to bring up the rest of my twists. And one thing that I can notice, again using that 2-fold rotational symmetry, is that these pleats up here are forming an accordion. So there I have another reference. Over the compound wrap, I'm going to need an accordion. And then I'm starting to see that anvil shape. And I need to make this not be a crow's foot. I need to make it go in a parallel direction to its opposite pleat, which means that I can do a triangle wrap here. And I've got my anvil shape fully outlined, so I can go ahead and squash. And if anyone has any questions, I am keeping an eye on the chat, so feel free to drop your questions in there. And so once I have these 4 twists around the center, and once again, this is putting in this initial loop around the center in a way that I wouldn't do further loops out. So I'm not flipping back and forth so much, so we can get oriented. Then I'm going to flip over. I'm going to have my edge that is not parallel to grid lines vertical and keep it vertical. And now I have 4 locations where I need to put new rhombus twists, specifically closed rhombi. So I can go around and do these one by one. I'm not going to get any new pleat overlaps from doing this, just like we saw in the square tiling. When we have a center, we have 4 neighbors of the center and then 4 corners in that loop around the center. So I'll start with these compound wraps. I'm going to open up the wrap, and I can see that I have, well, okay, so from the wrap here, I'm opening up, I'm popping this corner point up. I'm being very careful not to pop up anything from the twist on the back. And from the compound wrap, I keep all of my mountain folds, but the important thing is to recognize that we do get a valid closed rhombus with that arrangement of mountain folds. So let's rotate around and look at it a slightly different way on the other side of the paper. So I'm opening, popping that up, and I'm going to look at my central rhombus and see, okay, my through line came in from the upper right, down through, and down out the bottom left. So my through line is coming in from the upper right and going straight through. The other two pleats are offset by 1 grid spacing. This is what makes a closed rhombus twist. And squash. So with those two from the compound wrap out of the way, we need to do the two with the triangle wrap. So the reason why we were able to set up a rhombus with a triangle wrap is because a rhombus is basically two triangles smushed together. In the case of the closed rhombus, that's 2 closed triangles. In the case of the open rhombus, that's 2 open triangles. And so we've got this closed triangle setup. We need to open this out and recognize, again, that through line direction. And also recognize that if we keep this pleat in this orientation, it's making a crow's foot. These 3 are all splayed out. It's not making an X. So we have our through line set. We need to change this pleat to complete the X. And it's going to contact the central diamond at the same location. It's just going to go down and make a tube pleat instead. Remember, we never have any pleats in this edge parallel grid direction, assuming you're working on a triangle grid on a square. Since we're in this aligned rhombi tiling, we only use 2 directions of the pleats. So next up, I'm going to do the same thing with this triangle wrap down below. So I have 2 pleats coming in that I cannot change, and so the pleat in the 3rd direction has to change. I set up my through line in the same direction as it's been for all of the other twists on this side. And then I get a tube going out. And here you can start seeing more of that symmetry, the 2-fold rotational symmetry. And I'm tucking my bone folder in underneath to iron out the corner of this twist. It came out a little bit wonky. We can see better the 2-fold rotational symmetry around the center. So we've got these 2 tubes that are going long. We've got these 2, so we've got this stretched, elongated structure that's the same on either side of the center, but not the same in all 4 directions or 3 directions or 6 directions or however many other directions you want to look at. So next up, we're going to do another loop around, and we're going to work. So the first thing we're going to do is identify which set of parallel pleats we want to work on next. And I'm going to choose this set on the edge that has the most distance along it. And specifically, I'm going to choose the shortest pleat to work on next. So there's 3 parallel pleats here, and this one is the shortest, not just because it's closest to the edge, there's also, partly because it's closest to the edge, but I'm choosing this for more than just the reason that it's shortest. It's because when I put in a new twist on this pleat, it will not run pleats through the existing center. But if I were to put a new twist in here, it would run a pleat through the existing structure. So grabbing the shortest pleat, I'm going to flip it over so it's on my right hand side. And then I'm going to find my tube structure relative to the nearest neighbor. Get my mountain in place there as well. And what we're going to do is, just like I did for the fourth rhombus on this side, I'm going to open the pleat below, pop it down, run my new pleat on top, and you'll notice that I didn't run it very far, and I was pressing down below, and it really wants to form a triangle wrap. So this is the same idea as reversing the pleat overlap in the square tiling when you put in a twist on one side and you want to go to the other side. And we're doing this just for the nearest pleat. And from there, I can start to see, okay, here's a pointy corner. Maybe here's another pointy corner. We've got our anvil showing up. And I need to put in the pleats that make an X around the anvil to get the rest of my twist. So squashing that one, I'm going to work along my set of 3 parallel pleats that I started with until I get to the end of them, which means that my neighboring twist that I need to do next is going to be a closed rhombus on the other side. So I'll grab that pleat overlap, flip it over so it's still close to me. And here I'm going to open the third pleat that's in the direction that we're not using, and then open the pleat under where we're going to put our new twist. And I'm noticing when I'm holding the paper in this orientation, the through lines are coming in from the left and going out to the right. So in from the left, and I'm going to need a through line through here. On screen. And the key is that the valley fold goes through on the top side of the mountain. Since the valley was on the bottom on the other side, it needs to be on the top on this side because this is a position of twofold rotational symmetry. And I can go ahead and set up my remaining pleat, which causes a tube. As this pleat is coming over, I can pop the extension down and form a triangle wrap. Once that's in place, I can go ahead and squash my twist. Now I have a new pleat overlap that I need to deal with. I'm going to grab that and flip so it's still down near me. And I'm going to set up the tube that feeds into this twist. I'm going to extend this pleat one spacing further, which makes my anvil shape really start to pop out. And make sure that I put my final pleat along the bottom edge of the anvil. So once I have that in place, I'll go ahead and squash that twist. And then, so I came from this direction, I'm going to continue going around the loop, starting with this pleat here. So I'm going to hold on to that pleat, flip it over so it's on my right hand side, and I'm going to pay attention here because this is something that we haven't seen quite yet. So I'm starting a closed rhombus with no extra references. So I need to pay attention and notice that I don't just have 2 spaces here, I actually have 3. So 3 spaces between valley and valley. So 1, 2, 3 is going to be where my valley comes in, and then my mountain above. And I can know that this line coming from the upper left, so this line here, is going to be my through line because it has been for each of the other rhombi on this side. So then my central diamond is going to be this grid triangle and the grid triangle on the opposite side of the through line. So first things first, I need to get this pleat overlap dealt with. I'm going to be changing the order of this overlap, and as I put that in, I'm going to go ahead and grab the rest of my pleats so I have a more stable platform to work on. I can notice this is coming in at a 60-degree angle. So I'm looking at this angle here between the grid direction coming in and the grid direction that's setting up this pleat, this twist rather. And that means that I'm going to need a compound wrap instead of the more normal triangle wrap. And once I have that in place, I can go ahead and squash. Then I'm going to go into that wrap, which means flipping over to the opposite side. On this side, I can use, so first I'm going to open the wrap. And when I open the wrap, it really wants to be a closed rhombus twist. And we're just going to shift each pleat over, shift each free pleat over one spacing. And I need to change the ordering on this pleat overlap so I can go to the other side more effectively. And when I do that, I could have it as a pleat overlap, but I'm going to choose to put it as a compound wrap, just like we've been doing. And again, yes, this is fast, but it is recorded. And so you can go back and see this as many times as you like. Once I've got that twist in, I've got the new pleat overlap that I need to flip over. And this time I have more references, and I could go ahead and squash this twist, but I've got these layers tied up underneath that I'm going to reorder and form a compound wrap instead. Then flipping back over, we're going to do exactly the same thing as we did with the previous open rhombus, opening the compound wrap and moving the 2 free pleats around one spacing each, while keeping them on the same grid directions. Okay, so now I finished the next set of parallel pleats, and now I finished this set of parallels. Now I'm on to this set of parallels. Shortest one is here off of the twist that I just made. So I'm going to flip over and put in a closed rhombus. Once again, we have 3 spaces between the valleys of the closed rhombi. So that puts my next valley out here, next mountain out here, and this mountain is going to be my through line. So my central diamond is going to be either side of the through line, touching up against my other reference pleat. Just like we've seen before, I'm going to reorder that first overlap, and we're beginning to pick up a pattern here of which wrap is used on which side of the pattern. So we're getting these simple triangle wraps on the elongated sides and the compound wraps on these more compressed sides. So that's going to be a pattern that continues the whole way. So as I do each twist on this side, I'm going to end up with a triangle wrap, and that's single set of three-way intersection of mountains, three-way intersection of valleys coming in there. And squashing our twist. And this is exactly the same as the open twist that I put in on the opposite side. Flipping over, keeping that wrap close to me. I'm going to have my through line coming in from the top left. And so I can open up the next pleat, put in my triangle wrap, finish setting up my closed rhombus, and squash. Then flipping back over to deal with this triangle wrap, I'm going to set up the tube that is my reference, push my pleat in one more. This really starts setting up the anvil in the center, and then set up my pleat on the far side. So one thing to notice is these tubes coming in on this side are two spacings between valleys. And then the tubes kind of spreading out have 3 spaces between mountains. This is another reference that you can use to set up your twists. So one more side before we've completed our loop, and I'm going to continue on the pleat off of the twist that we just put in. So flipping over, I've got 3 spacings because that's what we determined for these closed rhombi. And then as I put in the next twist, I'm going to need a compound wrap, so double zigzag. And it's going to set up an accordion with the finished twist. And we can double check that this is the same spacing that we've seen elsewhere. Then I'll flip over, open the wrap. I can either use my knowledge of the spacing that I need on this side, so the tube here, and seeing the anvil to set up the twist. Or I can say, oh, the compound wrap sets up a closed rhombus, so those 2 free pleats each need to shift over 1 space. And again, setting up a compound wrap below. Then we flip, set up the next closed rhombus and compound wrap. then flip, and we're back to the open rhombus. Again, reversing the pleat ordering to get the compound wrap. This is more my normal folding speed. And flip, and we'll finish with a closed rhombus on the front side. Okay, so now we've got a lot more twists, and I still have some paper left because I used a 32 fold grid. So I'm going to go around one more time and finish out the rest of the tessellation. It might not completely finish in one round around, but it's the same idea that we're going to use of, okay, let's find the shortest pleat. And if we've just done a loop around that way, it'll be the pleat off of the twist that we just finished. We'll flip to the side that's needed to put a twist on that pleat. Put in the twist and the wrap that is needed, depending on which edge you're working on. So the twist depends on which side, the wrap depends on which edge, and then we'll move into that wrap and set that up next. Again, setting up the wrap on the following pleat as well. And just work our way around, all the way around the tessellation. Until we run out of grid. So my prediction is that I'll run out of grid on two of the sides this time around, but I'm definitely not running out of grid on the on this side. I've got plenty of grid left. So there will be a bit more to do once I've finished this round. So I don't have any pleat overlaps left. That means I'm moving to a new set of parallel pleats, starting with the one off of the twist that I just made. I'll flip to the other side, and I know that I need 3 spacings between valleys here. And then flip, bring up my open twist, and we're headed into territory where we could get some partial twists. Just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And flipping over, I'll get another twist in here, another full twist. Flipping over, let's see, will this one be a partial twist? Yes. Not by much, but there's just little enough paper here that we lose the corner of this open rhombus. And then the twist on this side will be a partial closed rhombus. Again, I'm using all of the other twists to determine the orientation. And with that, I reach a new set of parallel pleats. I can also do another just barely there partial twist. This should be tucked like that. And I can tell where this goes because the obtuse corners of the open rhombi are coming right to the end of the slit of the closed rhombi. And then I can continue with this next pleat, making another set of twists. Again, I'm now moving more at my normal folding speed, so I would expect that you would need to pause the video to keep up. Or just try it on your own. So getting these things in place. We're just going to continue around in exactly the same way. So once you get the structure of the tessellation, it really is about repeating the same moves over and over. We're not changing anything as we go further out. And again, if anyone has any questions, I do have an eye on the chat. One question that commonly comes up is, what paper am I using? Right now I'm using Skytone from Mohawk. You pretty much need to order straight from the manufacturer. It's not always particularly available. And yeah, so details on that, I use the lightest weight available, 60T or 60 text weight. And here I'm starting another edge, exactly the same. Well, we'll see how exactly the same it is as our previous edge, because if you recall, I wasn't able to start this tessellation precisely in the center because rhombi are not centered on grid intersections. So we shall see how much it is the same and how much it is not. It's looking like I have one less grid spacing on this side. So there should be more partial twists to deal with. So my first two twists, I get in okay, but their corners are right at the edge, so I know my next one's definitely going to be a partial twist. And on the other side, I had a little bit of wrap under this rhombus. It extended a little further, so the analogous one is this one with a bite out of the corner. This one only gets to the obtuse corner before it stops, and then flipping over, I can get this very partial rhombus, like a quarter rhombus, and I don't have any grid. Well, okay, so I can do like very, very partial corner snip of the next rhombus, but then there's really no grid to add the next closed one up here. So I'm going to move to the next set of parallel pleats and put in a new twist up here. And so that was just finishing the old loop with those partials grinding out into the edge, and I'm finishing up my tessellation with a new loop and we shall see if this one more layer is enough to finish this side. It looks like I can get a little bit more out here, but we'll wait until I've done this pass for this loop. And flip and set up the next. It's going to be a partial twist. We've really got to keep track of exactly where our anvil starts and ends if we want to get this partial twist collapsing well. It's right at the edge there. And then we'll have a partial twist here as well. And then looking at this corner, is there anything else we can put there? Well, we know that everything going this way ends up being a tube. So there's going to be a very partial open twist if you want to put that in. And let's see. Do we get anything on here? No, because we need to go 2 spacings to reach the corner. We run out of grid right there at that second spacing, so we don't have anything to put here. And I'm going to come in and clean up this corner now, flipping to the back side. I know I'm going to need an open twist in here. And this is really a matter of taste, whether you put in the partials or not. I like to, especially on these practice pieces. But for my finished pieces, I typically will end with a border. And so I'll work to get some kind of alignment between my tiling breaks and the edge of the paper. But for this one, we're just practicing the structure, and so there's no alignment between the tiling break and the edge. If there was, I would have the same amount of paper off of each of these 3 twists. And you see, I do not. So next up, I'm going to continue the same direction I've been going around on this side. And I'm going to start on this pleat. And that is going to put a new closed rhombus here. And yeah, likewise, this edge isn't going to have any partial twist on it because we don't have enough paper. Those two spacings from coming under the corner are as far as we get. We don't get another twist. And I'm going to carry over to my pleat overlap. And get another twist in. Flipping over, I can get another whole twist. Dun, 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 dun. And we're going to see probably a little bit of difference between this side and the other side that I just finished because, again, we weren't able to fully center the first twist. And so, yes, I'm seeing a little bit of difference here. And make sure that this is popped in the way that will let me get my next partial twist. And we get just a little bit in this corner right here. And we've got a little bit left on this corner as well. Kind of projecting where the next corner of the rhombus will be because this is the edge that doesn't have grid intersections. And maybe there would be some fold right here, but actually it looks, if there is, it's like this. But really not anything to worry about. And then over here we have just a teeny bit more rhombus, closed rhombus, I should say. So that is, I think I call it open lattice or something. It's an alternating pattern of rhombi, closed on the front, open on the back. And you can see the other form of alternating closed and open rhombi with them on the same side in my Rhombus Twists tutorial video, which I'll make sure to link down below. And I would challenge you to not just fold the alternating closed rhombi on the front, closed rhombi on alternating sides, denser together. Do the variable spacing where you have the 3 spaces and then 2 spaces and then 3 spaces and then 2 spaces in each direction. Get those clusters of 4 rhombi. That's what I call caravan. Makes a fascinating pattern. And then try also using the open rhombi on the same side in the same way as rhombus weave, and in the opposite sides in the same way as this lattice pattern that we just folded. So that's my challenge for you. Go and try and fold all 6 of these variations and then play with some of the spacing to see if you can get even more variations. See which ones you like, which ones you don't. Maybe try and do this one denser together so you have the rhombi on even skinnier spindles. Figure out what you like about it, what you don't, and that's the start to making your own patterns. So happy folding, everybody.